right, well, we're in the shop today. We're back to work on my F80 M3 seat time drift week car build. We've got about a week and a half to get this thing done, and we are knees deep. We have the transmission out. It's over here on the bench, so we can do a new clutch. And we have the entire rear subframe pulled out of the car. Literally the entire driveline is out of the car, with the exception of the engine, which we already took apart to do the crank hub on. So we may as well have pulled it out too. We've taken everything out so that we can upgrade everything. One, so it's better suited for drifting, and two, so it holds up to the rigors of drifting. Drifting is hard on stuff. So the rear subframe is kind of where we need to start. Now we pulled this out because we're gonna be upgrading our diff bushings. We're gonna be changing our rear diff mount to a double mount to prevent the diff from moving around. We've got new arms to go in. We've got a dual caliper setup to go on, which requires us removing the wheel bearing. We've basically got to strip this whole thing down to put all our new parts on it, put it back together, and put it back in the car. We're also going to take advantage of it being out of the car and there being nothing in here to obstruct us to run our handbrake lines and some other things that we need to run from the back of the car to the front of the car. So we're almost done with the teardown phase. Soon we'll be going forward putting things back together, but we've got a little more tearing apart to do. We need to get this rear subframe blown apart. I'm really hoping that we can get these axles out of these wheel bearings. I have my concerns that they are gonna be stuck, but we're gonna do what we can. Worst case, we pull the knuckle off and try to press them out. But if we can get those out, we're gonna be in good shape. Those and the diff bolts. So that being said, we've got a lot to do and not a lot of time to do it, so we're gonna get right into it. So after all of the struggles we had with the subframe bolts seizing and breaking and us having to weld them in and that whole mess, I was really worried about these axle nuts because we have to get these out to get the wheel bearings off to get the dual caliper set up on. So they have to come out. And fortunately, the axle nut came off, which was step one, but the axles were putting up a fight. We had unbolted the knuckle to try to hammer them out, give them some freedom to move backwards, and that didn't seem like it was working so great. So we left the other side a little more bolted in and gave it a shot to see if, hammering it with everything nice and tight would allow that shock to work towards moving the axle out. And unfortunately, nothing. I mean, it wasn't even considering movement. It's not like we were getting some signs that this thing was going to move. It didn't even try. So I soaked them in PV Blaster overnight. I came back in the morning, wailed on them with a 10-pound sledgehammer, and nothing. They didn't even try. Didn't even flinch. So I decided, all right, we got to keep moving. We need to get this subframe apart. So I decided to just take the knuckle off with the axle attached, and we'll tackle this problem later. We will try to put this thing in the press, put it somewhere where we can take a different approach at this, because what we're doing right now is definitely not working. So we get both axles out with the knuckles, get those out of the way, and then it's time to pull the diff out. Now, fortunately, the diff does come out. That was definitely a concern, again, after all these bolts wanting to seize on us. And the rear plate was really the last thing, because these bolts are Loctited, pretty easy to break one. So we used some heat. We made sure to be cautious and careful and heat them up nicely, and they all came out. We got the rear diff plate off. So that's at least one crisis averted. No snap bolts in the diff. All right, well, we got the subframe pretty much completely blown apart. We still need to pull the arms off that we're replacing, but the subframe is separated from the diff, and even more importantly, we got the rear diff bracket off. So this is the bracket that we're going to be replacing with one from Turner Motorsports, which is going to allow us to use both of these bushing holes. For whatever reason, BMW didn't do this, and the diff has a lot of play. So we're going to be taking advantage of both bushing holes, and we're going to be replacing these bushings with upgraded poly units. We're also going to be replacing all of the bushings and our front diff plate as well. So fortunately, at least all of that stuff came off. I wanted to make sure that it was going to, because these axles, total other story. These things have fought us tooth and nail, and I was worried about this as soon as I pulled the wheel off and looked in here at how much corrosion there was, and apparently this is a common thing. Freaking BMW, man. So we've got some other ideas we're gonna try to tackle to get these things apart, but I did go ahead and order a used set of knuckles because they were like 80 bucks. I already was gonna replace the wheel bearings, and I already ordered a spare set of axles to bring with me on the trip. So we have everything to just toss these if we have to. I'm really gonna try to avoid that because I'd like to have a spare set of axles, but we gotta make sure that we have an alternative option to get this car together and go on this trip. So that being said, we're gonna shift our focus a bit. Instead of just fussing with that thing, we're gonna try to get some of the other major stuff done, so that way, ideally, we'll come back to that as one of the last things. And we'll have those parts in hand in case we need to just go that route to get it done. So we have our Wisefab angle kit for the front. We've also got a fire suppression system we're gonna put in this car. Even though it's a seat time car, we wanna make sure to protect our investment. And there's a really good spot for it in the back. And Josue is working on one of the most important pieces of a drift car puzzle, the handbrake. So we got this handbrake set up from Drift HQ. Basically this is gonna mount to the factory handbrake holes where it bolts in. This is gonna bolt to that, and this is gonna go in the stock location. We've also got their line kit, which we really wanted to route all of this while the subframe and the transmission were out, because it's gonna be a lot easier to keep things tucked up nice and high. So at the moment he's working on getting the stock set up out of here. There's a lot of interior pieces in here. It's a little tricky. But yeah, point is, we've got other stuff to do, so we're just gonna do that. Give this a rest. We can't keep fighting with stuck hardware and spinning our wheels. We need to get some more work done. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this stuff out of the box, see what we got to work with, and start tearing into this thing. What do you think, Josue?
Get in there.
Get in there.
Get in there.
All right, so we have our Wisefab angle kit here, and we have our fire suppression system. So basically we need to get the fire suppression system done and plumbed before we put the subframe and the transmission back in, because it's gonna be a lot easier to route these hard lines since we intend to route them all under the car. This is just kind of an extra insurance policy in case a turbo oil line bursts or something like what happened on Duarte's car. We have something to try to put that fire out, as opposed to just having a little handheld fire extinguisher. So we want to get that in, same as the handbrake lines, while all that stuff's out, because it'll be a lot easier. And then the Wisefab has to go on before we can put the engine bay back together, because we can't get these off once all the bracing's on. So it's one of those things, you gotta kind of bounce around. We need to pull the suspension off, get the Wisefab on. Once that's on, then we can do our new intercooler and get all our bracing back on and put the front of the car back together. So that's what I'm gonna start on. I'm gonna start tearing the suspension off so we can get the Wisefab on and we can continue down the path. Ideally, we'll get the front of the car done for now and have our parts to move on to the rear stuff. So every time I think we're done taking stuff apart that could break or snap or seize and cause us a ton of headaches, I find a new thing that could break, snap, or seize and cause us a ton of headaches. And this time it was the bolts that hold the rotor on. These are just to hold the rotor in place. And of course they were stuck and they were stripped. So I had to drill them out. Now, fortunately, as much as these BMW bolts seem to like snapping and seizing in place, they are very easy to drill. They're really soft. So I guess that's +1 point for the -5 they get for all the bolts snapping and seizing and getting stuck in the first place. So now we can move on to taking the rest of the suspension apart. Now, we're not going to be reusing any of this stuff aside from the wheel bearing. So we can take this out as one big assembly. We don't need to take it off one piece at a time and replace one piece at a time. This whole giant combination of parts can come out as one big unit. So we get everything ready, drop the top hat bolts, and boom, the whole thing comes out as one assembly. Now we can move on to the other side, and it fortunately comes out too, and now we've got the last bit of disassembly done. There are no more parts that need to come off of this car that could fight us. Finally, we're over that hump at least. All right, it's another day, and the plan for today, the ideal scenario would be that we get the Wisefab fully installed and finished up with the BC coilovers. We get the handbrake and lines all done and routed, and we get the fire suppression in with the lines routed. It's a bit of a tall order for one day, but I think if we hustle, we can do it. So I'm gonna start on the Wisefab while Josue's not here, so that way I can work on the car at chest height and ideally get this most of the way finished up, assuming we don't run into any headaches. This is a kit that fits multiple different cars, and you use kind of different misalignment spacers depending on which car, which subframe, things like that. So I'm hoping that this all bolts together good and we don't need anything. I mean, this is the same kit that Duarte runs on his car, so in theory it should work, but I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch with this car, man. It has been a fight. For a 6-year-old car, man, this thing has it's definitely put up a fight. So speaking of that, I clamped the whole hub assembly with the axle to the table last night, and I poured in some ATF mixed with acetone, and that should eat away the corrosion. And we clamped them up like this so it can work its way down the splines, and ideally we can get these broken free. Now I have a backup plan, I have an escape plan. I'm gonna try my best to get this thing done, have a little bit of time to spare so we can make sure it works before we ship it to Arizona. So that being said, I need to quit jibber jabbering. We got a whole plan of what needs to be done every day, and it's not gonna get done if I don't do it. So let's get into it. So before we can start assembling the Wisefab, we do actually have one more thing that needs to come off, and that's our tie rod assemblies. So we're gonna be replacing these with the Wisefab units and tie rod spacers to allow the rack to go to a little bit more angle. So we need to get these old ones out of the way. And fortunately, they came out easy. They didn't fight us either. So we dropped the sway bar out because it's not gonna fit with the Wisefab. And then we need to start getting the Wisefab lower control arm ready to go on. Now, again, this is fit for multiple cars, so they include different misalignment spacers depending on what car and what subframe. So for our M3 aluminum subframe, the pocket is a little bit tighter for that arm, so we have to swap in these different misalignment spacers to fit in there. And these are pretty interesting. Normally, these are loose in there and you just put them in by hand, but with the Wisefab stuff, they're almost a press fit, which is actually, it's kind of neat because they don't fall out when you're trying to install stuff. So I kind of like it, but it took a little bit of finessing to get the new ones in. So with that done and out of the way, we've got a little clearancing to do to the subframe just to make sure that the control arm can fully articulate without running into anything. And then it's just about getting our rough set close before we bolt it in. We want to get this thing most of the way where it needs to be adjustment wise before we tighten everything down, so that way it saves us some time later on. And really we're basing that adjustment off of just where everything fits good, more so than the actual alignment specs, because we have no idea what those are until we get everything else assembled. So with both arms on, we need to get the knuckles and the hub assembly on. So we're swapping over our wheel bearing hub assemblies from our stock knuckles. We had to do a little modification to them. We had to cut off the bolts that I drilled out and knock some pins out that locate the rotors, because we're going to be using different rotors. Now, I also like to take the step to clean off any and all corrosion off of the mating surfaces, because A, you're going to fight yourself installing it, getting them bolted on, and then B, if you do have to fight to get them on and they kind of have to press in and suck them in with the bolts, they're going to really be tough to get off one day. So I try to avoid that. All right, well, the control arms are mounted into the chassis loosely. We're going to keep everything loose till it's all assembled, then tighten it all up. We got our tie rod spacers in, so we still need to put the tie rods in, but we're going to do that last once everything's in here. So next we need to get the knuckle and the coilover in. I'm going to assemble them out of the car and put them in as one unit. I think it'll be a little easier not wrangling three pieces at the same time. Oh, so you got the handbrake. Did you get it all bolted up there? Yes. Nice. Now he's gonna start working on running our, oh, he's already started working on running our handbrake lines. So you can see it comes out of the factory handbrake grommet. How neat is that? Uses the factory handbrake cable mount here, and then I don't know what he's gonna do from there, but I'm sure he'll figure it out. I think UPS is here. So now I need to get our knuckle coilover combination assembled. We got our knuckle, we've got our wheel bearing that's gonna go on, we've got our top hat, and then over here, we have our BC Racing DS series coilovers. So I'm a big fan of BC. If you've been around a long time, you know that I worked there for 5 years before I started doing YouTube. I run them on pretty much everything. Everything that has coilovers has BCs. So these are the DS series. I would highly recommend, if you're gonna get some, to get the DS, especially if it's a street car. They just ride so well. I won't go too deep into the technical mumbo jumbo, but more or less, they're stiff on low shock velocities, which is turn in, braking, acceleration, the things where you want your shock to be stiff, but they're soft at high shock velocities, which would be over bumps and undulations and things like that. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get a really tight suspension that kind of blows off over bumps, so it's not so stiff and bouncing you around. They are definitely worth a little bit extra. So anyway, let's get these unboxed, get them on the bench, get our combo assembled, and then try to throw this whole thing on the car at one time, so we can at least get one end of the car put back together. So for this car, we just went with a full off-the-shelf DS series. We didn't do any custom spring rates, any custom valving, which BC does offer. I just didn't feel we really needed it for this car. Now, in hindsight, we might have wanted to bump the spring rates up, because with the Wisefab, we're not going to be able to use the sway bar, but we'll try it as is. We want to keep this thing soft and comfy as we can and still have the performance. So we get everything cleaned up for the mating surface on the knuckle for the hub, just to make sure we don't have that problem of them getting stuck. And then we run into a little bit of a problem with the bolts. Yep, gotta go to the hardware store. The benefit of having your own hardware store. So the bolts this comes with is for whatever reason, there's 2 different thread pitches for these F80 wheel bearings. We ran into this problem when we were up on the tail of the Dragon. I had a bad wheel bearing. We couldn't get one before we left, so we found one on the way and ordered it. It was a whole debacle. And it was the wrong thread size. It was M12 by 150, not M12 by 125. So this is our same situation. These bolts are for the M12 by 150 wheel bearing. We have the M12 by 125 wheel bearing. But fortunately, I have basically my own hardware store. I have a bunch of different size bolts and nuts for this exact reason. The time I save not having to go to the hardware store, and we like to use new hardware on things. So anyway, it turns out I had the exact right size bolt, and I don't have a lot of these. I only have like a few different sizes of 12 by 125. Most of my stuff is 12 by 150. So yeah, anyway, moral of the story is I'm stoked. This one actually works better than the stock bolt because it's got a smaller head. It's easier to get in there, and it goes right flush to the thing, so it's like the exact right length. I do need to re-up my hardware. I haven't ordered hardware in a while, and I'm running low on a lot of things. So with our bolt debacle figured out, we definitely got lucky there. I mean, I have a lot of hardware, but it's hard to get the exact right size like that, and those were perfect. So with that done, we basically torque the hub assemblies to the knuckles, get the knuckles attached to the coilovers so we can put it all in as one. Now it's a little bit heavier and a little bit more strenuous to do it this way, but it's definitely quicker because once we get the top bolts in, all we've got to do is put one bolt in to attach the knuckle to the lower control arm, and our angle kit is officially on. All we've got to do is our tie rods. So they recommend that you cut about 5 millimeters off these for when you're using them with an F80, and I wanted to double check that and just see where we were at with them full length, and we definitely need to cut a decent bit off. They're just quite a bit too long. So we tossed them in the bandsaw, cut them. Now the nice thing with the bandsaw is that you can cut between threads and you almost don't ever really need to repair the threads, but I like to round the tip of it off in the belt grinder anyway, just because it makes assembly easier, and this is a part we're going to be servicing, taking on and off down the road anyway, so might as well make our lives as easy as possible now to save us time later. So with that done, with the tie rods cut to length, we can go ahead and assemble everything with the boots. We can Loctite our tie rod spacer, our tie rods. It's something you definitely don't want to come loose, and then get our boots all clamped down in place and call the angle kit pretty much done and dusted. So while I'm finishing up that, Josue's almost done routing the hard lines for the fire suppression system. The routing areas on this car just work out so perfect. Such a nice, easy route to get these hard lines up to the front. All right, angle kit is on. What an interesting feeling to see a Wisefab kit on an F80 M3. It doesn't feel like it should be there. It feels wrong in a good way to have a Wisefab kit on this car, but man, it's looking snazzy. Went together pretty easy, very little modification involved, all bolted up. We've still got to do the rotor and the caliper. We had to get different rotors, and I had a hard time tracking them down, so I'm hoping they're right. So I want to try, I have one waiting for the other one. I'm going to try that on with the caliper and make sure that all works. If that's all good, then it's squared away aside from an alignment up here. On the line routing front, Josue got the bottle mounted in the trunk. I'll have to show you up there when we drop the car down. But the 2 lines come out. I know that seems silly, but it's just the bottle has a T on it. So this is the way we had to do it. So one's gonna go and spray the fuel filler neck area. Basically this whole area is where fuel could potentially be spilling out and burning and setting on fire. So we're gonna have that there. And then the line, And then the line routes down on the frame rail here, which this all gets completely covered up with a big cover too, so it'll be super protected. Tucks up through there, and then he's working on putting the first nozzle. We're basically going to spray each turbo area with a nozzle. So, you know, if something's going to catch on fire, it has to be near something hot. So it's most likely going to be over here where all these oil lines are, and the heat from the turbos, which is going to be the hottest part. So we're going to focus on spraying this area. If we had one more T, we'd throw one more nozzle spraying at the fuel rail, but we don't have enough T's. This kit's kind of weird with the amount of T's and nozzles they give you. So I might order another T and we'll throw one more nozzle up there later, but for now, those 3 are kind of the main areas that I'm worried about. So anyway, I'm gonna quit jibber jabber and get back to work. Let's see if this rotor and this caliper are gonna fit on here. Hopefully Hopefully they do. Fingers crossed on this one. So the Wisefab kit comes with two options. Basically, you can use the stock mounting point on the knuckle, the caliper mount built into the knuckle, and use these smaller rotors, or you can use this adapter bracket and use the full size rotors. So I wanted to test out both theories, both sizes, and see what seems like it's gonna work best and see what we could fit, because the factory rotors are big and I'm not sure they're gonna fit underneath an 18. So that explains why.
These are the wheels, dude.
It still looks baller in there, even though the rotary looks small. Yeah. It would have been sick to flex on them. Would have had to run 19s though. And these do fit perfect. Okay. Yeah. All right, been testing rotor combination. So they give you a bracket and then the factory bracket that's built into the knuckle. So this is with the smaller rotor off a different car. And as you can see, it looks a little silly because you got the factory big end brakes with a little small rotor. Over here with the adapter bracket, this is the OEM rotor, which obviously looks way cooler. It's a big giant two-piece rotor. I really wanted to run these factory rotors just because it's part of what makes an M3 an M3. However, they're too big. We test fitted a couple 18s. We could not fit an 18 over top of this brake rotor combo. It's just too big in diameter. So we're gonna have to run this one to be able to run 18s in the front, which we need to do for clearance reasons and for availability reasons. We have a lot of 18s floating around. 18s are easy to find. It makes more sense. Maybe one day down the road, I'll try to be a real baller and put 20s on this car, but it's just so much harder to get tires for them. So anyway, we're pretty well wrapped up here. I'm just waiting on that other rotor and some brake pads to come in and we can finalize all this. So that is exciting. Angle kit is on. Josue got the fire suppression system almost fully finished up. So you can see our nozzle there. We got one more to go. He just wants to bracket it and mount it, but routed all nicely with the heat sleeve. The bottle is mounted in the trunk. We still need to mount the power source for it and determine where we want to put the buttons and run the wires for those. But you know, that's pretty easy stuff we can do at the end and kind of the button up phase. So we're pretty close. This was our goal, was to get both of these projects done by the end of today, and we got both of them most of the way done. So I'm happy with that. I give Josue a pat on the back. So yeah, point is, now that we have the angle kit on, even if it's not 100%, we can start working on, drop her down, Josue. We're now kind of on schedule, right? Now that the angle kit is in, we can put all this back together. We're waiting to get that done before we can put any of the bracing back, so we can get our new intercooler in, our charge pipes, get all the bracing back in, and finalize this, which will be huge. I'm really looking forward to trying to get that knocked out and out of the way. You can see the bottle back here in this nice little cubby. It's just literally the perfect place for it. This thing was begging for a fire suppression system. So that's down there. We've still got room next to it. Nifty. And it'll be covered up so we don't have to worry about anything banging into it. And then Josue also got the handbrake lever done in here and all mounted up. So that is our dual caliper hydro. So clean and sleek to have the pull-up style right here. It's in the perfect spot, easy to reach from the shifter. I love it. We're gonna get the boot back in. He's gotta hook the line up. We're gonna try to put as much back in this console here as we can once we get everything bled, but all in all, it's coming along. We're cruising right along. We still gotta change our steering wheel. I have another suede steering wheel to go in that's not a square. But that's low on the priority list. Worst case, I will drift it with that wheel if I have to, but we're making progress. I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. It's late. We've been putting in late nights and we're gonna continue to put in late nights until we get this thing done. And I hope you guys stick around for it. But if so, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.